With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Abraham Sion.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. And I would like to thank Doris and, of course, Steve Goldberg for the very nice words. Actually, I would like to say a few words which I found in the homepage of the Children of Holocaust Survivors. I don't have the exact text, but it says from Jabotinsky that for 3 years he was trying to warn Polish Jews of the plight that is coming over Europe in 1938. And his hair turned white after 3 years because nobody really listened to him. And we know what happened after 1938. We are in 1938. Israel is at a very critical stage. I would say that our situation after 63 years is not much better than it was in 1948. We made many mistakes. And one of the mistakes was the Oslo Accords, where Israel came to Arafat at his worst time in history and offered him to become a president of a state within Israel. You remember that Arafat, that was the Gulf War, and it was 1991, 1992, and he was thrown out of Kuwait, and nobody really wanted to have anything to do with him. When he would come to the United States for the conferences here, United Nations conference, he would be taken from the airport to the conference and then back and thrown away from the country. So we offered him to become a president. And we wanted to achieve two things. First, that there will be an end to terror. And the second thing is that we will have peace and quiet and get rid of, say, 1.5 million or 2 million Arabs. But we did not achieve any of this. First of all, because terror became much stronger after the signing of the agreement, of the Oslo Agreement, and also because we did not get rid of anything. The demography remains the same. Now, if we want to see what is the outcome, what are the mishaps of the Oslo Agreement? Because if we don't know what's wrong with the Oslo Agreement, we cannot change our path. And as Steve pointed out, in the Center for Law and Mass Media, that's exactly what we are doing. We're doing research, and we're trying to find solutions, alternatives to the two-state solution, which is the biggest mistake that we've done. And really, there is no mistake that we haven't done so far. And all the Arabs have to wait is just for us to continue to make mistakes in order to lose the country. The Oslo Agreement was our initiative. Excuse me. The Oslo Agreement was our initiative. The withdrawal from Gaza was our initiative, and many other things are really our initiatives. It's not the Arab initiative. And we tried to convince the American administration that our way of thinking is the right way, which is not. So what happened with the Oslo Agreement? The first thing was that we lost all the holy places forever. When, for 2,000 years, when Jews were thinking about the return to the homeland, they were not thinking about Tel Aviv, they were not thinking about Netanya or Beersheba. They were thinking about the holy places, and mostly about Jerusalem, and Bethlehem, and Hebron, and Shechem. These were the places that we were yearning to go back to. And suddenly, a Jewish state gives it up. And to whom? To a nation that we created. There was no Palestinian nation. All the cultural, economical institutions in Palestine were Jewish. The Jerusalem Post and the Jewish Agency for Palestine, these were all Jewish institutions. There was no Palestinian, there was no Palestinian state. And suddenly, people who are 4,000 years old, 5,000 years old, Jerusalem being their capital, suddenly give up to someone who was created maybe 60 years ago, even less. So this was one big mistake that we've done. The second thing was that by going through this agreement, suddenly Israel became Goliath, and the Palestinians became David, and they were the underdog. They were the ones that that the world had to protect from the Israelis, while Israel is in a ghetto surrounded by 200 million Arabs. So when our struggle was against the Muslims and the Arabs, we were the underdog. Suddenly we became Goliath, and you can see the shift in treating Israel from looking at it as a victim to looking at it as an aggressor. This would not have happened if it weren't for the Oslo Agreement. The third thing was that for the first time, many Israelis and Jews around the world started looking at Israel at a countdown. In other words, the question was not whether Israel is going to stay forever, but the question was how many years Israel is going to last. I can tell you that since the Oslo Agreement, there has been a trend in Israel to get a second passport. This is very Jewish. When they feel insecure, we try to find places where a haven that we can run to. I remember once I was in Switzerland, and I was on a train, and I met a lady, and we started talking. I never saw her before. She said she was from Rhodesia, and that she left Rhodesia when the blacks took power. And she told me something which was at the time very interesting. She said, you know, when I left Rhodesia, when the Jews started to leave Rhodesia, then I knew I was in danger. They know when they are in danger. So, this is one thing which is very important in the struggle. In other words, a country can topple down not by means of weapons, but by how strong you are to keep going amongst all the hazards that you have around. Then, of course, it depends how the other side interprets what we do. The other side did not see it as being appeasement of the Arabs. It was not translated as something that showed power. It showed weakness. And for the first time, the Arabs started feeling that Israel is at an end, and therefore all they have to do is to put up pressure, and they will achieve their goal. So actually, the Oslo Agreement, instead of bringing peace, maybe deferred peace for another 100 years. Because peace can only be had if the other side believes that they cannot possibly annihilate Israel. But when they think that this is a possibility, then there might be that the Arabs would feel strong enough to carry on the struggle. And of course, how does this whole thing look in the eyes of the world? If the Jews say that Judea and Samaria is an occupied territory, then the world would say, tell the Jews or the Israelis, why don't you give it up? If it's not yours, just get out of there. You yourself admit that Judea and Samaria is not Israel. Then why are you keeping it? Suddenly, peace is not an issue. The issue is two-state solution. Nobody is talking about peace today. Nobody even believes that peace is possible. You know why, until now, what was the reason that Arafat did not accept Ehud Barak's offer? Ehud Barak offered 100% of the 1967 lines. When I say 100%, that means around 93%, and then exchange of territories for the other 7%, which means it's 100%, with control over the old city, also the Wailing Wall. And he said no. Why did he say no? He said no, first of all, because he wanted the refugees to go into the Green Line. Now, let's figure that. What exactly is he aiming at? We are giving him a state. And remember, Israel was the only country in the world who offered the Palestinians a state. The Palestinians were under Jordanian control for 19 years. They were under Egyptian control for 19 years. Nobody even thought from those two countries to give the Palestinians a state. Not only that, but Jordan annexed the West Bank to be part of Jordan, and nobody accepted that except for Britain and Pakistan for their own reasons. But even the Arab League, even the Arab countries did not accept that. And the West Bank was never Palestinian, there was never a Palestinian state. And yet Arafat refused because he wanted the refugees not to go to his country. Can you imagine that Israel was established And the Israelis would say, we want the Jews to go to America. It's the same thing. And when this happens, this is the delegitimization, sorry for the word, of Israel. Because if Israel says that these areas do not belong to us, then what is Israel doing here? Because if we take Palestine, for 2,000 years, was not a state, and Jerusalem was never the capital of any country ever, except for the Jewish state at the time of David and Solomon. If we take this into consideration, then, thank you. If we take this into consideration, then what exactly is the balance between the Palestinians and the Israelis? Israel is only 63 years old, but Palestine is 2,000 years old. Don't forget that the Romans gave the name Palestine in order not to call it Judea. Now, in the eyes of somebody in Finland, or in Sweden, or in Africa, who knows a little bit of history, says, wait a minute, if you take the Atlas and go back far, 200 years, 300 years, it was Palestine. It was never Israel. So Israel is the new state, and Palestine was the old state. Therefore, the Israelis took it from the Palestinians. And you won't believe that the Palestinians now are saying that they are descendants of the Philistines who fought David at the time. Because with the Arabs, there is no problem whatsoever. They can tell the biggest lie without a wink. They have no problem at all. We have a big problem. And this is part of Hasbara, that we deal quite a lot. We call it public diplomacy. I was once approached by the Israel Defense Forces spokesman who was looking for people who could speak English or French or Italian for the foreign press. And he approached me if I would like to volunteer, and I said, with pleasure. But then we started talking on the phone. And there was, at that time, the Eldura case, you know, of the boy who was killed in a crossfire between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And of course, Israel was the first to admit that Eldura was killed by our bullets. So he asked me, what do you think about it? And I said this was a grave mistake. He said, why? I said, are you sure that this happened? Can you be 100% sure? He said, there is no 100% sure. Then I said, then why admit if it's not 100% sure? And he said, you know, we are the Israeli Defense Forces, we cannot tell lies. And I said, you don't have to tell lies. You just don't have to admit something that you're not sure that you've done. And he said, you know what? I don't think we'll need your services. Another point here is that Israel brought in a Trojan horse. Now, no nation survived a Trojan horse. We brought in something like 100,000 people from Tunisia legally, because in the Oslo Agreement, or in the agreements that followed, we accepted 10,000 terrorists to come into Israel, into the West Bank and Gaza, which was Israel actually, with their families. Every Palestinian has a family, and a family means his father and mother and his children, which are around 10 people, so it's about 12 people coming in. Now, if you multiply 10,000 by 12, you get 120,000. The law of return. They all came in to a country which has no borders. There were no borders. And they were allowed to carry weapons. And they used to make the tours in armored cars together. 2 or 3 Israelis and 2 or 3 Palestinians. At some time, they used to have coffee in the morning, and the Palestinian would take his gun and shoot the Israeli. Just like that. And it happened once and twice. And they stopped these tours, these car tours. But I'm trying to show that we brought in not just a foreign army, but terrorists into Israel with no borders. So what happened soon after that is that people were blown up in buses and cafes and cinemas and other places. And if you try to imagine what that means, for example, for me as a father, to have my children go by bus to school and not be sure that they're going to come back. And I even, at times, felt very guilty that my children are going by bus and I'm going by my private car. And I'm safer than they are. And it's sometimes people were blown up 3 generations at a time. In a cafe, in a restaurant in Haifa. It's a restaurant I used to go to. I still go to. On my way to Haifa from Haifa, I stopped by. A young woman, Arab, dressed very well, very nicely, entered the cafe. She sat near a family who were the grandfather and grandmother and the son and the daughter-in-law and their 2 grandsons. And she ordered, and after she ordered, she blew herself up. 3 generations went just like that. And the world doesn't care. The world is silent. The world comes up only when Palestinians are killed. I could imagine what would have happened if the Palestinians were in the Congo and they would have fought an African tribe. Nobody would have heard about them. Even if 1,000 were killed, nobody would have heard about them. The world hears about the Palestinians only because they're fighting Jews. That's where the press becomes interested. That the Jews are fighting the Arabs, and sometimes they ask, how come that in a skirmish there is 1 Jew killed on every 10 Arabs? There's no balance. There must be balance in killing. Justice. So that's because what we are. And as I say, the Oslo Agreement actually changed the United Nations resolutions, Security Council resolutions 242 and 338. Because after the 6-day war, when 242 was accepted by the whole world, also by the Arabs, it said that for real peace, Israel would withdraw to secure boundaries, not give up all the territories that were taken in the Six-Day War, but part of the territories. And the legal profession, the people or the lawyers, have written that again and again there was an attempt to have this 242 apply to all territories. But it said territories and not the territories or all the territories. Now we withdrew from all Sinai. And we withdrew from parts that we had from Jordan. So we actually gave up more than 85% of the territories that we captured. Nobody even thought that we should give up all Judea and Samaria. And there was nothing said about the Palestinian state in the 242 resolution. When we came over and offered to make peace with the Palestinians, we actually gave up our right on 242 and 338. And this was another mistake, I would say. But not only that, the moment our struggle was against the Palestinians, we lost a lot of contentions that we had. For example, exchange of civilians and exchange of, say, confiscation of lands or of property. What I mean is, all wars, every war, has exchange of population. You know, at the Second World War, many Germans were expelled from Poland. Many Polish were expelled from the Ukraine. These are things that happen at wars. At war, when there was war between Turkey and Greece, there was exchange of population. Many Turks who lived in Greece were expelled to Turkey, and many Greeks who lived in Turkey were expelled to Greece. Only here they speak about the refugees. In Israel, there are 6.5 million Jews, out of whom 6.2 million are refugees. Actually, all the Jews are refugees. And half of them are refugees from Arab countries who left their property much more than the property that the Arabs left when they fled Palestine at the time 1948 war. So when we have a struggle against the Arabs, we can put that up. But when we have struggle against the Palestinians, we cannot tell the Palestinians, look, we were expelled from Iraq and we were expelled from Egypt, and therefore it's right that you were expelled from Palestine. Actually, the struggle is not between Israel and the Palestinians. The struggle is between the Jews and the Arabs. Because if we don't see it this way, and we make peace, say we managed to succeed in making peace with the Palestinians, supposing. Now, who are the Palestinians? Suddenly you have Hamas, who say we don't recognize this agreement. And you try to appease the Hamas, and make more concessions, and then the Hezbollah comes and says, look, we don't accept it. And after the Hezbollah comes the jihad, and after the jihad, you have other terrorist organizations, and you have Iran, and you have other places, and you don't finish with it. I mean, it's impossible to come to any agreement that will end the conflict. When a few years ago, Mahmoud Abbas, who is the so-called president of the Palestinian Authority, was asked, if you get everything you want, everything you name, you get, is this going to be the end of the conflict? And he said, no. Nobody can end this conflict. The conflict has to do with a sacred land that the Arabs can never give up. So when people, an Israeli government, which was liberal Israeli government, thought that by establishing a Palestinian state, the conflict is going to come to an end, it was a mistake. It's actually a religious war. And with a religious war, you never end it. Not in our generation. Now, I'm not trying to be so pessimistic. I'm not trying to be so pessimistic because I'll tell you why. I believe that in the end, not in my generation, there will be peace. But that is only when the Arabs will accept a Jewish state in the Middle East. This is not going to happen now. It's not going to happen in the next generation. But it's going to happen in the end. And if you see the history of the world, if you see the wars between Norway and Sweden, which lasted over 200 years, and between France and Germany, then you say, even between the worst enemies, peace will come in the end. But it won't happen now. And if it won't happen now, let's see what we can do. Not just give more, waive more rights and give more territory and put ourselves in jeopardy. But what we can do is to look at things in a practical way. That's what we are doing in Ariel, in the Center for Law and Mass Media. We're trying to figure out the hazards, and we're trying to look forward in the next 10, 20 years to see what are the problems that should be tackled and should be known today. I can tell you, I can say that because I've written about it and I have proof of what I'm saying. That's why I can sort of brag to say, I envisaged what's happening today in 1993. In 1993, I said that the Oslo Agreement is going to lead to a Palestinian state. Nobody believed me. They thought that I was talking nonsense. And some of the members of parliament, Israeli Knesset, asked Shimon Peres at the time, in the beginning of 1994, things are being written. I wrote in the papers at the time. I also published a pamphlet. And he was asked, they say that this is going to lead to a Palestinian state. Is that true? And he said, no. This is impossible. You know why? Because we won't agree. And a Palestinian state cannot be established without our consent. Now you can see how naive this was. to think that a Palestinian state requires the consent of Israel, and without the consent of Israel, there will be no Palestinian state. So the question is, what's going to happen in the next 20 years? Now we have Iran, we have Turkey, and we'll have many other hazards. But the core of the problem is the Palestinian problem. In other words, the struggle on the same land by two nations. One nation who was actually the owner of this land, and not only the owner, but also they were promised the land. Now, when I say promised the land, I can tell you that we cannot disregard the Holy Scriptures. Israel never made a big case about it. But if you go all over the world, and I really like to go to churches in Europe, for example, wherever I go, if I see a nice church, I just go in. Even in the Vatican, the Bible is open on a high stand. And in the Bible it says it's the land of Israel. And when you turn the pages, you see Israel on every page. So when you speak to the Christians, when you speak to the cultured world about the Bible, about the promised land, they understand. The trouble is that we never make an issue out of it. But the Arabs do. The Arabs say it's their land, and their land was confiscated, and they are the victims, and they were thrown out, and our public diplomacy is very poor. I was involved in politics. I didn't want to go to the Knesset, but I was involved in politics. I was a member of the Central Committee of the Likud Party. And the trouble is that even the Likud and Israel Beitenu, that's the right-wing parties, never really thought that Hasbara is important. And I can tell you that out of $100 billion, which is the budget of Israel per year, only 10 million goes on Hasbara, on PR, on explaining the situation. And therefore, this has to be changed. I'm working on it, but it's taking time. I've spoken a number of times to the foreign minister, and he says, you're right, we have to change the situation, we need more money, and so forth. But actually, this can only come from the rank and file. It can only come from below. It can only come from the people. It can come from the academic field and towards convincing the right people, the decision makers. And actually, we are having a conference on the 2nd of April, as Steve stated. And the reason for the conference are actually 3 items. One of them is the Supreme Court. In Israel, the Supreme Court has unlimited power, not alike any other country in the whole world. I mean, in the Western world. No, I think in the whole world, because in totalitarian countries, the courts really have no power. But in a democratic country, The Supreme Court has enormous power in Israel, and this is something that has to be also changed and investigated. The other thing is the alternatives to the two-state solution, which is the main theme, and this is actually something that we are trying to carry on in the future to bring a change in public opinion, also not only in Israel, but also in the Western world, and particularly in the United States. And that's what I'm here for, to explain this, that there are alternatives to this two-state solution. I'll tell you what I think. And it's not new. The country of the Palestinians can only be Jordan. Because Palestine, by the Balfour Declaration, included the West Bank, west of the River Jordan, and east of the River Jordan. What Britain did sometime in 1922, that it decided to tear out from Palestine, to tear out Jordan, which was about 70% of the territory. 80% of Jordan are Palestinians. So it's a matter of time that the Palestinians will take over. And when they take over, then there is a home for the Palestinian people. This is also one of the mistakes that we've done at the time, when we helped Hussein, King Hussein, to overcome Black September. Because at that time, the Palestinians were about to take over. And it's only our tanks who came to the border that did not make this happen. So Jordan is Palestine. And at the moment, until this happens, the Palestinians in the West Bank will have full autonomy. Of course, full autonomy, but under the inspection of Israel. Israel will have to annex the West Bank. It's unthinkable that the University of Ariel would be left to the Palestinians. The University of Ariel has now 12,000 students. It's in a city of 20,000 people. It's not a few tents with a camel. I don't know how many of you have been to Ariel. How many have been to Ariel? Anybody? Very good. Well, it's 2 or 3, but I'm inviting you to Ariel. If you happen to come there, you can call me up, and I'll be glad to show you a real new university with labs, with research, and with student life that can match any other university in the United States or in Europe. And even today, even at the time that Ariel is a high standard university, we are having problems with other universities who are boycotting Ariel. I had an experience a month ago when a colleague of mine was registered in a conference in Germany. And after some time, he received a letter saying that he cannot take part in the conference because he lives in Ariel, and Ariel is an occupied territory. Now, this is fantastic. So he showed me the letter, and I answered them and said, it's amazing that a German university in a German territory is preaching Israel about occupation. After some time, he received a letter saying that he can participate in the conference. But the whole thing was ridiculous in a way of occupied territory and boycott. I am very hopeful, and I think that Ariel University is there to stay, and we will be able to change public opinion and to see Israel as a Jewish state, and the Oslo Agreement abolished by us, and we will take a different path. But of course, we'll need the help of every person that believes in Ariel and believes in the Center for Law and Mass Media and what we are doing. And any help will be, of course, very much appreciated. And I thank you. Thank you very much.